From the Banner offices along the Inner Harbor, it is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano, Jonas, Shaffer, and columnist Kyle Goon joining us here on the podcast today. We have a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about a new offensive coordinator and a new defensive coordinator for first-year head coach Jesse Minter and the Baltimore Ravens. And we'll talk about some other additions to the Ravens staff as well. But first off, Kyle, you walked in here. Jonas, I should say, has bloody knuckles. I have a bloody nose. Put two and two together there. What would you assume happened here?
A fight over the remote.
Yeah.
Jonas, a spirited debate over whether you're Team Ilya or Team Shane in heated rivalry.
There you go.
Unbelievable. Which I'm sure Jonas watches regularly.
There's only 6 episodes.
I haven't watched a minute of it. Have you?
Yeah.
You
watched the whole thing?
It's not that great. I'll be honest with you.
Not that great is what he says. Kyle disagrees.
I just thought it was fine, but it does consume about 90% of my conversations with my girlfriend right now. So that's where we're at.
Sounds healthy.
HBO.
Love it. All right. Guys, let's talk about some of the additions made to the Ravens coaching staff. But first, did a little research, and per Football Reference, Jesse Minter is the first ever head coach in the NFL to have the first name Jesse. Of the multiple hundreds, about 500 NFL head coaches who have ever coached a game, he's the first ever Jesse. This is per the engaging data. Oh, as Jonas breaks the mic. Per engagingdata.com, the name Jesse was most popular in the 1880s, peaked again in the 1980s, which makes sense because Jesse Minter was born in 1983. It has been on the decline ever since. We may never see a Jesse head coach in the NFL again.
Yeah, but Jesse's girl, Jesse Minter is a girl dad, so that exists as well.
So Jesse's girl is what
first ever Jesse's girl, a daughter of a coach.
Yes. What year did Jesse's girl come out?
Ask the same question.
In the 80s. So I wonder if that was the spike.
Could be.
Actually, in the 1880s, interestingly enough, the popular name was just Jasaniel.
Jasaniel?
Yeah, biblical. Look it up.
Really?
No.
Okay. Jesse's Girl came out in 1981. It is, of course, a different spelling for Jesse's Girl than Jesse Minter.
So there's the popularity, though, I believe.
There certainly is. Declan Doyle might be the first ever Declan offensive coordinator, I would think, right?
Irish?
I don't know.
Don't you think that we would think more highly of Jesse Minter if his name was Cole Minter?
Cole Minter?
Because his full name is Jesse Cole Minter. I feel like there is some value in having a cool name, and there's some negative value in having like a bad name. Like I remember a couple years ago when I was doing mocks and mock drafts, PFF kept on wanting me to do to draft Zach Tom in like the 4th or 5th round. I was like, there's no way I'm drafting a dude named Zach Tom for the Ravens. And turns out he's one of the best right tackles in the NFL.
Never trust a man with 2 first names. Yeah. That's what I learned early.
It's sort of like Joe Alt. Like you feel like there should be more, like Joe Altman, but it's just Joe Alt.
Yeah.
Just like a 2-syllable whole name. That's weird.
It is weird. Zach Tom had Tom, right? As his last name. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's I don't think I've ever met anybody.
2 first names.
Yeah. It's all very weird. We should try out some nicknames though, I think, for Jesse Minter. I'm working with the Mint Man. I think that could be a good one. What do you think, guys?
Can't force it.
We'll workshop it. All right, let's talk about the additions made to his staff. Let's talk about Declan Doyle, added as the offensive coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens. Kind of, to me, looks a little bit like Ben Affleck, but then, Jonas, you brought up he looks a little bit more like his brother, Casey Affleck, right?
Yeah, let's just hope that like the season doesn't go so poorly that he has to reenact the scene from Manchester by the Sea.
Oh, geez. The popular scene from, that's the only scene I've seen.
You guys know what I'm talking about.
You know the one.
My goodness.
This podcast is already off the rails. Anytime we get Kyle in here, things get off the rails very quickly. And Kyle hasn't even done anything.
Literally already broke the mic.
Like, yeah, that's true. What other popular movies are there for Casey Affleck?
I can't name one. Can you guys?
Gone Baby Gone?
That's true.
I haven't heard of that one.
He's also in what's it called? The famous one that was the breakout for
tell you.
Ben and Matt Damon.
I'm looking through his IMDb
I'm just
page
having
right
in
now.
mind.
Good Will Hunting?
Yeah, Good Will Hunting. He's in Good Will Hunting.
Is he?
He plays the tough role of Ben Affleck's little brother.
Gotcha.
Must have really taken a big leap of him, taken a lot of acting chops to play the brother of his actual brother.
Declan Doyle.
Declan Doyle.
Is Declan Doyle older than Casey Affleck was when he was in Good Will Hunting? Because I feel like it's neck and neck. Declan Doyle is 29 years old.
Yes.
And when I saw that and looked at the picture of him at the same time, my knees actually sent waves of pain up to my brain. Like I was like, oh my God, I just aged like 5 years by looking at this picture.
Yeah, Declan Doyle is a young man.
A 29-year-old offensive coordinator.
Yeah, he is going to be the youngest offensive coordinator in the NFL. It is fascinating to see how this is going to work out because Declan Doyle comes from Ben Johnson's coaching staff. Ben Johnson has a chance, I think, to turn himself into the next Sean McVay in that he could sprout all kinds of branches from his coaching tree because he is one of the hottest names in coaching right now. Anybody attached with Ben Johnson, similar to anybody attached with McVay a few years ago.
I feel like that is like, but that's a good comparison because there was a rush for the next Sean McVay.
Yeah.
And I would argue it came up a little short. I mean, we kind of forget, but Cliff Kingsbury was at one time considered the next Sean McVay.
Right.
And now he doesn't have a job right now.
Well, I remember when Cliff Kingsbury got hired by the Cardinals. In the press release, I think the Cardinals specifically mentioned that he had a cup of coffee basically with Sean McVay at some point. Anybody who had any attachment to Sean McVay was suddenly a hot coaching candidate.
Right.
And for Declan Doyle, he does have that Ben Johnson attachment. And that article on Sports Illustrated that a lot of people are going back to and looking at now to determine what kind of coach he's going to be certainly has a lot of players and other coaches singing his praises. The biggest thing, though, is he was not the play caller in Chicago. And Jonas, there is a difference between somebody who can scheme up an offense and somebody who can call plays for that offense. People have described it as an art versus a science. You know, the science is designing the offense. The art is getting the rhythm of the offense in the middle of the game and sequencing plays correctly. Why is it a little bit more of a risk to hire a first-time play caller as offensive coordinator when Jesse Minter is a defensive-minded head coach?
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of extend the metaphor that people have made about you are handing the keys to a potential Maserati to a guy who maybe only has a driver's permit, and if it's a Maserati, then you might need to know how to drive stick, and we don't know if Declan Doyle can even drive. Like it is his lack of play calling experience is it lends itself to all kinds of imagination because he could be literally anything. But we've seen a lot of like well-regarded supposed wonder kid coordinators not turn out to be anything. I mean, I don't know how like fair this comparison is, but you see what happened in New York this past year with Tanner Engstrom. I forget how to pronounce his last name, but
the Jets offensive coordinator.
Right. He's a guy off the Ben Johnson tree, was the passing game coordinator for the Lions previous to 2025, had done a lot of success there, obviously in marrying, the stuff that Ben Johnson likes to do, Dan Campbell likes to do, had the benefit of the great offensive line, Jared Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams. But that Jets offense this past year, whether you want to blame the offensive line or the injuries or just the terrible quarterback play, was not any good. And now Tanner is back to being like a passing game coordinator after 1 year. So this could be a really, really exciting hire. I think best case scenario, we're talking about like a guy who might only be in Baltimore for 2 years, maybe only 1 year before he gets a head job somewhere else. But it is a very, very scary proposition to hand the play calling duties to a guy who I think Bears fans have said just did like the second half of preseason games, and that's it. And preseason games are famously vanilla. So this guy might not have a clue of what actually it looks like when the bullets are flying until week one, because when you go through training camp, all that stuff is scripted. When you get to the preseason, all that stuff is tamped down with the aggressiveness. So the most important game, the next test of his could be like a very high stakes week one game because of just how the NFL likes to set this stuff up. And we have no clue what it's going to look like for him. Like, he could design the first 15 plays and have it be a total gem. But as we saw with Todd Monken, like a lot of times, once you get past that initial script, it gets a little bit dicey in terms of how you respond to what the defense is showing you.
Yeah, and I think they put in some guardrails for Declan Doyle in the hiring of Dwayne Ledford, which we talked about on our last podcast.
Play calling experience.
Yeah. Offensive line coach and run game coordinator. They also hired assistant offensive line coach Sean Flaherty. So they're putting in somebody who is experienced in that area and trying to give him pretty clearly a baseline, at least for a run game. But based on the experience of working in that Bears staff, it's tough for us to watch Bears film, look at what Declan Doyle did last year and say how much of this was Ben Johnson, how much of this was Declan Doyle, because those two were married so intimately last year. But Jonas, you looked at some of the game film from last year. There were some repeating trends for that Bears offense. One of them was outside zone runs. Chicago finished second in outside zone runs last year in the NFL, behind only Atlanta, where Dwayne Ledford comes from. More under center. Caleb Williams played a lot of under center. Lamar Jackson has been mostly in the shotgun during the Todd Monken years. They ran almost 50% of their plays under center with Caleb Williams, and the Ravens were in the shotgun 64% of their plays. Pre-snap motion is another big one. Chicago ran it 60% of the time. The Ravens were the middle of the pack. Quick passing game, get the ball out of the quarterback's hands quickly, and then trick plays, which is not something that we saw a whole lot from Todd Monken. We saw a little bit of creativity, the hurricane play aside, which I think was a John Harbaugh brainchild anyway.
Yep.
So you do see some trends, but ultimately, this is going to be Declan Doyle's shot to create his own offense with Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry.
Yeah, and I'm really interested. I mean, Declan Doyle is the same age as Lamar Jackson.
Yeah.
He's younger than Derrick Henry. I think the proof is in the pudding a little bit. I mean, obviously he was a part of a really impressive offense last year. And I think one thing that, Jesse Minter mentioned that I kind of like, if you kind of like take the Chicago Bears improv, some of the things that Caleb Williams did at the end of Bears games. Obviously they were a great second half team. They're a great fourth quarter team. You kind of bring the structure to succeed. The short pass game, I think, was really lacking this year for the Ravens. But then you also give the quarterback a little bit of room to shine in the moments when he needs to shine. And that sounds like Lamar Jackson, right? I mean, that sounds like an offense that you want Lamar Jackson to be in. So, this past year, I'd say you kind of saw some of that structure break down. It did not feel like Lamar was getting the ball out quick, whether that's a Todd Monken problem, whether that's a receiver problem, whether that's a Lamar problem. You need more of that, because I don't think, even though they're probably going to change the protection a bit, I don't think the protection is going to be dramatically better than last year. So you need some structure and some short passing options, but you also need, hey, let's let Lamar be Lamar.
Right. And I think it's interesting to contrast the style that Caleb Williams played with last year, where he's running around, he's scrambling. A lot of his best plays, a lot of his highlight reel plays came out of structure when he is just making magic happen. Contrast that with what Jesse Minter said in his introductory press conference about wanting Lamar to be able to play within structure, not having him do so much out of structure that he has to put the cape on every time and figure something out. They want something in place for him to be able to work through. And ultimately, if they need him to do that, we all know Lamar Jackson can do that. But they want him to be a little bit more structured in the way that he plays. Contrast that with the way Caleb Williams played, which was totally out of structure, Jonas.
Yeah, I mean, Lamar and Caleb had pretty similar scramble rates this past year. Surprisingly close, actually, considering just how limited Lamar was as a runner over the second half of the year, the final 3 quarters of the year. So we'll see exactly what Lamar does in an offense is a little bit more regimented. Like Todd Monken always talked about how much he appreciated Lamar having that second playability, and it worked. In 2023 and 2024, not so much this past year. I think it's always going to be a bit of a process for Lamar, like getting to a point where it's a little bit more regimented in terms of his progressions. Like the quote that I always come back to was, I think RG3 talking about how, normally if you're a quarterback, you go from 1 to 2 to 3 in your progressions. And Lamar, because of how he sees the field and just how he was developed, like would go from 3 to 1 to 2. And if you're playing in a more of a timing-based offense, a more West Coast type of system, that might not really fly. Because I think like Lamar could get away with it because one, he's an incredible athlete, and two, because as John Harbaugh would say over and over again, like Lamar has one of the best views of the field of anyone that he's ever coached. Like he didn't really have this kind of tunnel vision when he went through the reads, and that helped him, make do with how he kind of process things as a quarterback. But if he's going to be in a little bit more of a kind of constrained system, then there might be some growing pains early in this process. And I'm just kind of curious to see what we see in training camp, because the Caleb Williams approach from Ben Johnson this past year was basically the fire hose. Like, we're going to throw everything at you. It's going to be probably pretty ugly for you in training camp. You might just have some days where you're throwing 3 picks, but that's going to give us an idea of what exactly the base is that you're comfortable working with, and we're going to try to build off that.
Right. And Caleb Williams had a pretty not disastrous, but he had a not so great rookie year.
Oh, way below what you would have thought.
And that offensive coaching staff was totally overhauled in the middle of his rookie season. So they didn't quite know what was going to work well for him in his second year with Ben Johnson. And so they had to kind of throw all the things against the wall and figure out what was going to stick. They have an idea, and hopefully Declan Doyle has an idea of what has worked for Lamar Jackson in the past. 2 years ago, Lamar Jackson should have won MVP. He broke all kinds of records in his first 2 years with Todd Monken as the offensive coordinator. And I am curious to see how much of that they end up borrowing and bringing towards the first year under Declan Doyle.
I'm guessing a lot, because the other factor that I think Jonas is somewhat alluding to is Caleb Williams had not been very successful in the NFL, and he's a second-year player. Lamar Jackson has been. He's, going into his 9th season. He, to some extent, knows what works well for him. So if you try to change his progressions, is he going to go with it? Frankly, is he going to adapt to a new coordinator coming in, or is he going to say to that coordinator, look, like, this is how we do things here. This is what won me 2 MVPs. Like, adapt to me. So, I'm not saying that Lamar can't do that, but I am saying, to me, it's more of a challenge with Lamar Jackson to go in and be like, okay, we got to move this around here. We got to move this around here. We'd like you to do this, because he has that track record of success, and he can kind of say, well, look at the tape. Look what I've done in the past. So it's going to take some buy-in, frankly, for Lamar, for a younger coordinator, and kind of belief that, like, okay, this guy wants what's best for me. As Jonas said, maybe it looks ugly in training camp. Is Lamar ready to take some lumps in his 9th year and be a little ugly in the service of being better when the season comes around?
Yeah, and I think you're encouraged by, if you read that story in Sports Illustrated by Jory Epstein about
Yahoo,
not Sports Illustrated, about, I know, how dare I, about Declan Doyle, you're encouraged by the quotes from players saying the first conversation you have with this guy, you can tell he knows his crap. He knows what he's talking about. And getting Jesse Minter and Declan Doyle to be on the same page as Lamar Jackson is obviously paramount in all of this. What we do know about Declan Doyle is he is the son of a strength and conditioning coach, son of Chris Doyle, who was at Iowa for 2 decades, ended his time there on not so great terms in 2020, separated from the university after several of the foreign players spoke out against a culture of racism at Iowa. He denied treating any athletes differently because of race. A lot of these guys, though, come from coaching families. And that's the one thing I have learned about this coaching cycle, guys, is that
this coaching cycle,
every coaching cycle. This is the way of the world.
Say the N-word. Yeah, the other N-word. Nepo babies.
Nepo baby. Jeez.
The other N-word.
Jonas is trying to get us canceled here.
I didn't even think of that.
Jesse's dad, Rick, obviously, I think he's likely to join this staff because he has been with his son on several previous
First
staffs.
Jesse's dad in NFL head coaching history.
Probably, yeah. Are you saying Jesse's girl, Jesse's dad? Is that okay? He's probably going to join his son as well. And Jesse's dad coached with John Harbaugh back in the day. John Harbaugh worked under him, and he acknowledged that he called up in an interview that Rick did with the Ravens Lounge. He called up John Harbaugh back in 2017 and said, "Hey, my son Jesse has got a lot of great experience. You would be really smart to hire him to your staff." I know this is how the world works, but it is just very funny to see all of these coaches benefit from their family name. I mean, Clint Kubiak obviously has his dad Gary, Mike LaFleur,
yeah,
the other LaFleur, Chris Shula, the grandson of Don. There just can't be all of the football knowledge being concentrated.
One of the best coaches in the NFL, Kyle Shanahan, is Shanahan.
They're
Rex
all
Ryan, Buddy Ryan, Rob Ryan.
Yeah. We just got unlucky because none of our names are Ryan or Kubiak or Minter or anything like that.
I'm unlucky because I didn't go into hockey with the name Goon. So
that's true. All right, guys, let's talk about Anthony Weaver, the other side of the ball. Anthony Weaver hired as the defensive coordinator for these Ravens. Now, this is a more experienced hire by every stretch. Anthony Weaver has been a defensive coordinator in two previous locations, once with Houston in 2020, and then the last 2 years with Miami. Of course, he's not coming here to be the defensive play caller. That's something that Jesse Minter will handle. But a former second-round pick by the Baltimore Ravens in 2002 out of Notre Dame finished his 7-year NFL career with 15 and a half sacks, spent 2 years on the Ravens coaching staff, or 3 years, I should say, on the Ravens coaching staff, 2021 through 2023. And it was a popular head coaching candidate this cycle as well, interviewed for 5 different head coaching jobs. What's interesting to me is that, yes, he has the Ravens ties, but he doesn't have Jesse Minter ties because they did not overlap on the Ravens staff. Minter's last year on the Ravens coaching staff was 2020. Anthony Weaver's was in 2021. And both with Declan Doyle and Anthony Weaver, they're bringing in guys that Jesse Minter has not worked with in the past. And both come with glowing recommendations from the staffs that they have worked with. But usually you see with first-time head coaches, they want some level of comfort. And the way they do that is by bringing along somebody that they've worked with in the past. I think none of us would have been surprised if Steve Klinkscale had gotten this job because he came from that Chargers staff and has a previous relationship with Minter. So the fact that Minter is comfortable being uncomfortable with new faces in his first year as NFL head coach, I think is fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, if you look back at John Harbaugh's first staff in 2008, it was him retaining Rex Ryan. So there was that connective tissue to the old guard. And then his offensive coordinator was Cam Cameron, who he had gotten to know, I think, on a Cincinnati staff or just an old staff back in the day. So the fact that this coaching staff writ large is just a mix of guys who are really, really good at their jobs and guys who he knows personally and are also really good at their jobs, I think is just an encouraging sign. Like, you want alignment. That I think that is probably the most important consideration when you're putting together a staff, because if you're not all pulling together in the same direction, then you're just not going to end up where you want to go. But you also just can't be so insular with your coaching tree that you are restricted it to guys who you are already connected to on LinkedIn. Like you need to look outside your comfort zone. You need to find guys who have proven it, done it, and you might have a little bit of a learning curve in terms of getting to know. That's Dwayne Ledford, one of the best offensive line coaches in the NFL. That's being willing to kind of share a little bit of the defensive limelight with Anthony Weaver, because what he means to this culture. How he can help you maybe navigate some of the back channels during some of those rough spots that are going to hit this season. So I think it makes a lot of sense. He's a guy who obviously was in demand, but not so in demand that he got a head job anywhere else. I'm sure he would have loved to land at a spot where he could get defensive play calling duties and maybe gotten a chance to lift his star even more. But the fact that he's coming back to Baltimore, that he already seems so gung-ho about the possibility to be this defensive coordinator after getting passed over for the job along with Denard Wilson for Zach Orr a couple of years ago, I think it's a good sign.
Yeah, I was texting with Gianna Hahn the other day. I was looking at what Jesse's staff was at that time. I said, it just feels like they need a former player. And I think that definitely matters. I mean, Jesse played small-time college football. Declan Doyle was a guy who kind of grew up around Iowa, like X's and O's minds. But I think just former players add gravitas. And I think, if you're Jesse and you're in this position where you're going to call your own defense, having a guy like Anthony Weaver, who just have to say is overqualified for this position, but has the gravitas of a returning guy who was with those Mike McDonald defenses and really understands the culture well, and as a former player, it adds something to this coaching staff that it was lacking. Let's admit it. I think, people have pointed out that this hiring cycle, there were 10 NFL head coaching positions. None of them were filled by a black coach. And I feel like that's got to be disappointing to a guy like Anthony Weaver, who has kind of been in this conversation for years. Even dating back to 2 or 3 years ago when after that 2023 season, I think he was kind of considered sort of a head coaching prospect. And now he's a defensive coordinator who doesn't call his own plays. I think it could be a win-win eventually for the Ravens. If you kind of make Weaver sort of back to the associate head coach that it was here a few years ago.
Right.
You give him DC experience. You pair him with a guy like Jesse Minter, who people consider a great X's and O's coach. Maybe over time, Anthony Weaver does get the credibility to be a head coach that he probably has already earned. I think it really says something about the NFL that there are 0 head coaches of color in, a cycle with Brian Flores and Vance Joseph. But I think it could be a win-win, even though Anthony Weaver is quote unquote taking a step back without play calling responsibilities.
Yeah. The knock on Anthony Weaver is just that his 3 seasons as defensive coordinator with the Texans and the Dolphins were not particularly fruitful. The first year with the Texans, that team was 30th in points per game allowed. First year with Miami in 2024, 10th in points per game allowed. And then Miami in 2025, 24th in points per game allowed. That Texans defense was not very good in 2020. It's difficult to judge him based on that. You saw definitely a lot of improvement in his second go around as defensive coordinator with the Dolphins. And it looked like they were really building something, and then took a step back this year. And I know you could say that team was never going anywhere. They traded away a lot of their defensive players at the deadline. So, what was he really working with? To start the season, they had several poor performances. Gave up 33 points to the Colts in week 1 this past year, 26 points to the Patriots in week 2, 31 points to the Bills in week 3, 21 points to the Jets in week 4. They gave up 24 points to the Browns in week 7. So they definitely had their fair share of struggles. But I think you could say maybe this is the best situation for Anthony Weaver, because what people who are around Anthony Weaver say, and what you alluded to, Jonas, is he is a tremendous leader. And he is a galvanizer in a way that few other coaches around the NFL are. Maybe his play calling leaves something to be desired, but it's clear that there is a head coach in there, and there is a leader of men in there. And maybe with Jesse Minter calling the plays and instilling his style of defense, but Anthony Weaver there as a leader, as a mentor, perhaps, to Jesse Minter, I think can do a lot for Jesse Minter in his first year. And maybe this is the best of both worlds. You get him on your staff, but Jesse Minter is still the one pulling the strings on a play in and play out basis.
And just alluding back to Anthony Weaver being the defensive line coach, right, under Mike McDonald. One thing that's become clear to me in this process of learning about Jesse is that there's a lot of cross-pollination between him and Mike. And I do feel like that's a bit of a Mike tie. So I don't think it'll be all Jesse saying, all right, here's my vision. I do think Anthony Weaver has some things to contribute, maybe some ideas, maybe, hey, this is how we did it a few years ago. Could we get back to that?
Sure.
If Nnamdi Madubuike is healthy, maybe they can get back to some of the things that worked, when this team was a really fearsome pass rushing team. So I find it, I don't think it's all just like top down, trickle down. I think there will be some stuff coming back from Anthony Weaver to Jesse Minter in the coaching process.
I think probably if you're the Ravens and if you're Anthony Weaver, like the best case scenario for what his candidacy becomes and what his coaching journey becomes is someone like D'Amico Ryans, who obviously was a great defensive coordinator with the 49ers, went over to Houston, turned things around there with the help of some great drafting. But he's given up play calling duties to as defensive coordinator this year, and obviously that Texans defense is thriving. And you look at those two guys, like former NFL players, like still obviously they cut an imposing figure, just both guys that look like they spend 6 days a week in the gym. And I think that resonance that you can have in the locker room can go a long way. It can really sell in the interview process. And not to be too cynical about it, but it is in the Ravens' best interest if Anthony Weaver is like a smashing success this year, because not only of what he can do for the Ravens defensive front, and not only what he can do for kind of sustaining the locker room culture and the workout culture, but like if he gets plucked for a head coaching job, that is 2 compensatory picks, 2 third rounders coming to the Ravens the next 2 years. You look at just what San Francisco was able to do with how they were becoming this funnel for minority front office candidates, minority head coaching candidates. That did a lot to kind of help sustain their run of success there in the late 2010s, early 2020s. And I think that was something that John Harbaugh always considered. I don't know if you want to say if it was a little bit like ham-fisted in how he did, like giving assistant head coach roles to guys that he thought just having that title might boost their head coaching candidacies, even if they weren't really serious candidates themselves. But now that we've seen Weaver be at a couple stops, now that we expect him to be on a defense that should be pretty good, now that he's coming from an organization like Baltimore, where you could kind of take some of those lessons and impart them to whatever team that needs them. Again, this is all contingent on things actually going well this year. Then you're talking about a guy who might not be long for Baltimore, and it could be a best case scenario for all involved.
Yeah, and we wouldn't be talking about the Eric DeCosta front office if we weren't talking about compensatory picks.
That's true.
So most important thing.
That's the priority number one when it comes to EDC. I'm also just fascinated with how the Ravens reached this point in the process, because during the head coaching search, Jonas, we were talking a lot about, well, if you're going to hire a defensive-minded head coach, he should probably pitch the front office on an offensive coordinator that he's going to bring with him. Doesn't seem like that was the case. I mean, maybe they threw around the name Declan Doyle during the interview process, but Declan Doyle also didn't interview for the Ravens head coaching job and doesn't have experience with Jesse Minter. Anthony Weaver doesn't have experience working on the same staff as Jesse Minter. So it is interesting that they hired Jesse Minter for Jesse Minter. It's not like maybe the Titans situation where they hired Robert Saleh knowing that he was going to get an experienced offensive coordinator to come with him in Brian Dable. They were sold on Jesse Minter.
I mean, yeah. I mean, that's not that hard to read between the lines, though. And I don't want to say anything about Jesse Minter's qualifications, because he does seem very qualified. If the Ravens hadn't hired him, someone else would have. I think that's pretty clear. But it's like, if you tell me from the outset, even if the Ravens are going to interview 20 candidates, this guy's worked here before. This guy worked with Eric Costa before. This guy has coaching connections throughout, including to the last head coach. Well, duh. I mean,
right.
And I'm not casting shade on the Ravens process, but I mean, come on. Of course they were going to land on this guy if they had their choice. I just kind of felt like some things are so evident that you don't have to be I wonder what's gonna I mean, it's kind of the obvious hire. So
yeah,
I don't know.
He was a name that we had circled for weeks.
I'm not surprised that a search led by Eric DeCosta landed on a guy who used to work for Eric DeCosta.
For sure.
I'll put it that way. And I'm not casting shade on the Ravens process, because I do think, under Steve Bisciotti, they want to be nothing if not thorough. But of course they're going to value certain things over and they're going to value things you understand the culture here, as opposed to you're going to bring your own culture. Some places need guys to bring their own culture. I mean, and maybe the Ravens do need a culture shift, but I think you see in Jesse Minter somebody that the front office and other parts of the organization can be comfortable with. You're not going to rock the boat too much.
Yeah. I think the exact opposite of the spectrum is what John Harbaugh is doing with the Giants. He goes over there. That whole process was completely different from the way the Ravens handled it. As Jonas put it, it was a recruitment. It was not a search. They recruited John Harbaugh. They got John Harbaugh. John Harbaugh said, I'm bringing as many people over from the Ravens with me as humanly possible. And he has done that. And now he's hired Matt Nagy as offensive coordinator. Would you guess, after losing out on Todd Monken? Hilarious.
Yeah, I retweeted The Simpsons still from this morning that I think says everything you need to know.
At Jonas _Shaffer.
There'll be no offense this year, boys. Something like that.
I mean,
yeah, I think just to like spin it forward. This is kind of a weird take, but I wonder if you could say that the emphasis on finding connectors, finding leaders, finding good communicators, like it puts more pressure on Lamar and the guys who are like the head of the snake, so to speak, on this culture, on this roster, to find themselves pretty early. Because if Jesse Minter can get himself in a position where he is hiring guys for important roles who he does not know, didn't really know Declan Doyle, didn't really know Anthony Weaver, but is entrusting them and getting Eric DaCosta and Steve Bisciotti on board to open up their checkbooks and pay big sums of money to bring them in, then I think it's a good sign for like his willingness to be a facilitator and a communicator, but you're going to need buy-in from the players as well. Like
Sure.
you're going to require that same level of compatibility. And I think Lamar's done a great job. I mean, one of my favorite Lamar Jackson stats, just from looking back at it, I know he's only had the 2 full-time offensive coordinators since he became a full-time starter, but year 1 with Greg Roman, wins an MVP. Year 1 with Todd Monken, wins an MVP. A lot of pressure on Declan Doyle to be the same. And it's just going to be interesting to see like what kind of flexibility Lamar has, or what kind of flexibility is needed from Lamar to handle what is like his 4th offensive coordinator in 9 seasons.
Right. And I think the way that this was handled in terms of putting together a staff, I think there are certainly risks in bringing in all these different guys who very few of them have worked together before. Declan Doyle's not only not worked with Jesse Minter, but not worked with Lamar Jackson. You don't know exactly how everything's going to go. Anthony Weaver hopefully brings some kind of knowledge of how things run in Baltimore, and so does Jesse Minter. But you're bringing in all these guys from different organizations and different backgrounds and hoping that they all coalesce and come together. But on the other side, the way that Harbaugh has treated things in the Giants, that is a franchise that needed stability, needed a groundwork in place. The groundwork the Ravens think is already in place here. And it feels like they hired Jesse Minter for Jesse Minter. And maybe Eric DaCosta said, we'll do a little bit of the heavy lifting when it comes to helping us assemble your staff. Because Minter wasn't the one with the relationship with Weaver. That was Eric DaCosta. I'm sure Declan Doyle was somebody that Eric DaCosta had circled even before Jesse Minter came into his office about this could be a future offensive coordinator. So I think this is also an instance of the Ravens betting on the infrastructure that they have. EDC having been an established GM, Lamar Jackson being an established quarterback that, offensive coordinators want to play with. That's something that Declan Doyle turned down other opportunities, and the Ravens were able to be the team to convince him to jump ship and to jump the Bears opportunity. And I think a large part of it has to do with the fact that they have Lamar frickin' Jackson and Derek frickin' Henry.
Yeah, I think it does. I just wanted to add here, I think if I may toot my own horn for the column I just did on Jesse Minter at Vanderbilt, I think Jesse fancies himself somebody who can work with anybody. He goes to Vanderbilt, he works with Clark Lee that he had no connection with.
The head coach there.
Sort of had a mutual friend who said, hey, like this might work for you. He's like, oh, I want to see if my ideas that I've learned in the NFL work in college. Terrible season, very bad season, 2-10. They're 120th in defense at 130 teams. They're getting their ass kicked in the SEC. Todd Monken hangs 62 points on them. Just one of my favorite little nuggets. And so you're sort of like, okay, and Jesse leaves for essentially like falling up to Michigan, and then leads one of the all-time great defenses. And you're sort of like, okay, well, like if you part ways after a year with a guy you don't know, that's like, all right, well, let's just move on. Clark Lee is a defensive guy as well. They're like great friends now. They're better friends now than they were when they worked together, to the point where Clark Lee comes out 4 times to LA when Jesse Minter first gets the job with the Chargers and looks at his playbook and is like, oh man, like I like what you're doing here. I like how you've chunked this information. Like I'm going to do that at Vanderbilt. I'm going to call my own plays at Vanderbilt, and I'm going to bring Jesse Minter's ideas. So 2 years after Jesse Minter was the DC for a horrible defense, he's influencing Vanderbilt's defense from LA. And he and Clark Lee are great friends, really good friends now. And I think that kind of explains something about Jesse and his mentality of how he thinks he can work with anybody, how he develops relationships. Clark Lee told me, we had some tough conversations that year, as you would when you're 2-10, getting your butt kicked. And I think Jesse's ability to stand up to me, to stand up for himself, saying, hey, I didn't like how you treated me back there, that really strengthened our relationship. And so I think, the Ravens have huge expectations, which is a big red flashing alarm for a first-year coach, right? First-time coach, first-year coach. Everyone thinks this team can win the Super Bowl. But I do think Jesse Minter fancies himself somebody who, hey, if there's a lot of pressure, if we have strained relationships, I can work my way through it.
Yeah, and I think that Vanderbilt year was certainly an interesting blip on the radar because everywhere else that Jesse Minter has been, tremendous success. All of his defenses have been awesome statistically. Everybody raves about them. And the 1 year was not a successful team. For him to be able to learn, still have people that he worked with. Yeah.
It's I believe we went to Michigan. And Jim Harbaugh, as I understand it, was sort of like, all right, fix up the defense.
Right.
Like I'm the head of this thing, but you make that work. You figure out the defense. So
yeah.
and I think that's how it worked for about 4 years between them. So I mean, that guy is not afraid to walk into an unfamiliar situation, and this is far from unfamiliar to him, but not afraid to walk into an unfamiliar situation with unfamiliar faces and like, all right, what do we have to do to make this work?
And I think it shows that he is able to deal with failure well and not lose his cool, not lose his head, and still have good relationships through it. So there are going to be times when people are frustrated with this team over the course of his tenure here. It could come in the first year, could come 10 games into the season. You never know. I mean, the interesting stuff from what Childs Walker wrote about after John Harbaugh was fired, bringing back that Super Bowl season when in October they had a near mutiny. They wanted to revolt against John Harbaugh for the way that he was handling them and handling practices. And he took it on the chin and listened to them, took their advice, changed things, and they win a Super Bowl. That showed a lot about the way that John Harbaugh was able to deal with failure and still be a student of the situation and of the moment and learn from that. And if Jesse Minter has a little bit of that, that's something that you look for in a head coach as well.
Can I throw out a reckless hypothetical for along the lines of what happens if Jesse Minter does not succeed immediately?
Sure.
I think it's safe to say that Declan Doyle, he's not too young to get an offensive coordinator job, obviously, but he might be too young after even 1 year to get a head coaching job elsewhere because, I think Sean McVay even had to wait until age 30, 31. And obviously he was more tenured at that point as the Commanders offensive coordinator, I think, to get that job. But if the first 2 years go about as well as possible for this Ravens offense and for Declan Doyle, Lamar wins an MVP. They're like top 5 in DVOA the next 2 years. It feels like Declan Doyle is the next Ben Johnson. And this Jesse Minter defense goes the way of the Vanderbilt defenses, or gets just rocked by injuries, or just they can't defend the run, they still can't rush the passer, and they end up kind of looking like this Zach Orr defense did at the end of this season, where it's like in that 15 to 25-ish range in yards per game, DVOA, points per game. I know that Steve Bisciotti said that the timetable for like winning a Super Bowl was 5 to 6 years, or just getting to the Super Bowl was 5 to 6 years at that press conference last month after they fired John. I'm just wondering, is there a world in which you get to a point where you are deciding, do we want to keep this guy who might be the next McVay, the next Shanahan, because we know just that offense is kind of the coin of the realm in the NFL with just how consistent it is relative to defense? Or do you say, we're good because if Jesse could find this one guy to be the next operator for this offense, he can find the next one. And we have so much confidence in what this defense can be that we're going to give him a little bit more lead in finding a solution.
This is honestly way more reckless than I thought it would be. I just feel like based off of the personnel, I mean, when I looked at the Chargers personnel the last 2 years, I was like, well, this team is going to suck. And they didn't. Like, I just think the Ravens are probably a top 10 unit. I mean, you have Kyle Hamilton. If you have Nnamdi Madubuike, that does a lot for these guys. And if
We have no
Roquan,
idea.
yeah, we have no idea, but he's tweeting. I just think, to be honest, of all the hypotheticals, I'm least worried about Jesse Minter holding up his end of the bargain. I just think
there are a lot of like really talented defenses out there that can struggle. I mean, you look at what, like, the reason that we were talking about the Jets at midseason and the trade possibilities that existed there was because of the talent that was available. Like Quinnen Williams, an all-pro defensive tackle, was available. Sauce Gardner, an all-pro cornerback, was available. They had Quincy Williams, who only a couple years ago was playing like a Pro Bowl linebacker. You put all that together, and all the like first-round capital that they invested in their pass rush with like Jermaine Johnson, and that was a very, very crappy defense. I'm not saying that like this is going to happen for Jesse Minter. I'm just saying there is a possibility in which the Ravens have a lot of talent on defense, but it doesn't play like it because of whatever structural disadvantages might be in play.
I don't see. I mean, that team was a good defense when they had Robert Saleh as head coach.
I know, but
I think
the
Jesse
reason that the
Minter
Jets hired
is that kind of guy.
The reason that the reason the Jets hired
Aaron Glenn
was because he was gonna, like, he'd made, you know, chicken salad out of chicken, you know what, with a like very banged up Lions defense, and it went the opposite way. Again, I have the utmost faith in Jesse Minter based on everything that I've, you know, all the people that I've talked to, all the stuff that I've read. I'm just saying there's no guarantee that he's going to be the golden goose that lays the golden egg.
Yeah, for sure. You're right, but I see it more as the problem I see as most likely is this all coming together. Like, is the mixture all blending? Like, is the defense good on the same night the offense is good? You know, I think there's more questions in this roster next year than we thought there were entering this past year, when everyone looked at the roster and was like, oh, this is a Super Bowl roster. I think that has been affected. And to your point, I think, you know, with the Jets and Aaron Glenn, there's some, like, can you get guys to play hard on defense if Justin Fields is your quarterback? Like, that's never a question for the Ravens unless Lamar's hurt. Like, I just think there's a lot more going for the Ravens than the Jets. I do think that this defense will be functionally better than it was last year. I think Jesse has kind of shown throughout his career an ability to elevate defenses, regardless of the pieces he has. And I think to some extent we're going to see some improvement. It'll just be like, hey, on Thursday Night Football, like, is the defense playing well against Joe Burrow on the same night as Lamar is throwing like 3 touchdown passes? I think that's the real key for this team.
Also, the Jets are the Jets. I mean, the infrastructure there is god awful. Yeah. And yeah, they had a lot of interesting pieces like Quinnen Williams, but that was not a good roster top to bottom. This right now, and there's a lot of work to be done, to be clear, but it's a solid roster. It's still one of the better rosters in the NFL. They're just betting on the person in Jesse Minter to be able to be the elevator, to be the guy that fixes all of this, that gets the best play out of their young defensive players, that gets an inept pass rush from last year to be able to get back to affecting the quarterback.
I'm going to say something crazy. If Tyler Loop had made that field goal and you just looked at the rosters on the AFC side of the playoffs, like, the Ravens were not playing like a good playoff team, so I don't think they would have. But I like the Ravens roster as much as any team that made the AFC playoffs.
Oh, like, for sure.
Especially with Bo Nix going out. Like, could the Ravens have made like a crazy run? Like, I think they actually could have. It was kind of a gap year in the AFC for the traditional powers, and obviously the Bills underachieved, and the Patriots are good. Like, you know, when they won 10 games in a row, I didn't think that was an accident. But I like the Ravens' whole roster better than the Patriots' whole roster. Like, it could have been a year where they could have broken through.
I mean, I think they won a lot of games because just they had the better roster than the team that they were playing. I mean, how they want to go on that win streak in the middle of the season, in part because they played a lot of teams with awful quarterbacks and awful rosters. And if Lamar Jackson were healthy, which he was going to be for that playoff game, they would have had probably the better roster and the better quarterback in a lot of the games that they would have played in the playoffs. I just mentally reached the point after that Steelers loss where it was just not going to happen. Just whatever was broken about that team.
The first Steelers loss.
Sorry, the second Steelers loss. And at times during the season, I felt this way, but it was obviously the final nail in the coffin that it was just never going to happen. It was just never going to come together in the way that we thought it was. As many times as we saw positive signs and flashes from this team, like the shutout against the Bengals, for example, it just wasn't going to come together consistently for them to make a consistent run. And you hope that they're able to change that this year. Jonas?
Yeah.
Did you think it was ever going to happen?
No, I mean,
Would you
I
have
thought
picked the Ravens to win their first playoff game?
I was prepared to write a story about how they have very little of the things that a Super Bowl winner needs, because there was a really good podcast a couple years ago, I think, with Nate Tice and Robert Mays on the Athletic Football Show, just looking at what are the commonalities for Super Bowl winning teams, and one of them is a pass rusher who can reliably get you 5 pressures a game. The Ravens didn't have that last year. They still don't have it this year, especially if Madubuike comes back not at all or is limited in what he does. I think that there's still obviously some limitations, but you're right. I don't think there was, the Ravens would have been, I think, slight favorites over the Texans based on the early betting odds that we got from Las Vegas had they beaten the Steelers. And I think that tells you all you need to know.
Yeah, but how many times were they favorites in games this year that they just didn't show up for?
Yeah.
I mean, that happened
far
too many times.
I think they had enough talent. They didn't play like it.
No, we were all duped.
That was I mean,
from the very beginning, so many of us had them winning the Super Bowl. We were all duped.
Not me.
Vegas was duped. Jonas, how many wins did you still predict them to win?
I didn't pick them to win a Super Bowl. And to all the people,
who did you pick?
That's a good question. I think maybe the Packers. I don't recall.
It was the Philadelphia Eagles.
Maybe
I think it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
It certainly was not the Patriots or the.
I just think back to your bosses who were encouraging me to get in the comment section of the Baltimore Banner Instagram post, razzing old Jonas for not having the courage to believe in the Ravens. Well, guess who's laughing now?
Yeah, and how does it feel? Not exactly.
I only picked them to win the AFC
because we're sitting here right now talking about Ravens' new head coach, and we're not sitting at the media row at the Super Bowl.
Your prize is a coaching search.
I mean, it is crazy to think about. Literally a month ago was January 3rd, the day before the Ravens were about to play the Steelers for the AFC North. Think about all the changes that we've seen over the last month. It is crazy how quickly life moves in the NFL. To move on from your head coach after 18 years, to have a new offensive coordinator, new defensive coordinator. Jonas, this is the first time since 1996, literally the year that the Ravens moved from Cleveland, that they're turning over offensive coordinator, head coach, defensive coordinator. They still don't know their special teams coordinator, but they're turning over their special teams coordinator.
Right. And to piggyback off of what Kyle was saying earlier, there's a possibility that CoCap himself, Anthony Levine Sr., former Raven, does remain a member of the staff, perhaps is even promoted to special teams coordinator. So that's another guy with a connection to the Ravens' way of doing things who could remain in the building.
Right. Chris Horton, of course, joining John Harbaugh in New Jersey, and Randy Brown is sticking in his role as well.
Anthony Levine came last year, right?
Yeah, from
he
Tennessee.
Came back from last year. And maybe it's just happenstance, but I felt like the special teams was much better this year than last year.
For sure.
With the return of Anthony Levine, a longtime special teamer for the Ravens. I don't know. I think that would be a great person to keep if you can. But obviously, one of the other things about this coaching search, and probably another reason why it's hard for Jesse Minter to come into the building and be like, okay, here's my coordinator. There's 10 openings.
Yeah.
There's openings everywhere. And you have 2 guys who are hired in other places who are now trying to poach the guys who, you might have ties with, or Eric DeCosta might have ties with. And so I do think, I was sort of going after the Ravens on their process earlier, but really, I mean, it's hard for Jesse to say, okay, this is our setup, when it's like, all right, John Harbaugh's recruiting against you, like Todd Monken's recruiting against you. I think, maybe those guys take some guys off your hands that you don't want to keep. I mean, the reaction to the George Warhop hire in Cleveland has been nuts. Yeah. If he had been fired mid-season, I think that wouldn't have been surprising to me. And now it's like, oh, he's taking the guy from Baltimore. Did you see the Baltimore offensive line not improve last year? Like, I think that's nuts. But at a certain point, like, you got to hire people you can bring in. So I mean, and how much recruiting power is there to bring somebody to the Browns? I don't know.
And they are bringing back, the Ravens are, inside linebacker coach Tyler Santucci. So that is a holdover from Zach Orr's staff. Also bringing in Mike Mickens as their defensive backs coach, pass game coordinator. We talked about that on a previous show as well. They're hiring defensive assistant / game manager coordinator Charlie Gelman, and they're also hiring defensive assistant PJ Volker, who has experience with Jesse Mentor.
Great talker, PJ. Jonas talked to him. I talked to PJ during the season about some of his players in the Navy defense. Yeah, good media hire, I have to say. Are we going to bring up the hire that apparently has reportedly happened during this podcast?
Sure.
With Joe Lombardi apparently coming as an offensive assistant. I think first reported by Jeff Schrebeck. Makes a lot of sense. Former OC, guy who's worked with Declan Doyle, play caller. It's like, hey, young fella, let me show you some things. And I think, that's kind of an interesting trickle down of the Broncos fired Joe Lombardi to keep Davis Webb away from the Ravens.
Yeah.
And the Ravens can take Joe Lombardi from underneath, which, I don't know. Like these coaching hires, and you never quite know how they're going to work out. But it's I see the sense of bringing a guy like that in.
That was a good offense with a not phenomenal quarterback in Bo Nix. I mean, Bo Nix has played better in his first couple of years in the NFL than I think a lot of people expected him to. And you could certainly give Lombardi a lot of credit for that. Been an offensive coordinator at 3 different spots, with Detroit going back to 2014-15, with the Chargers 2021, 2022, and with the Broncos. So he has plenty of experience, and to pair him with a new guy in Declan Doyle could certainly help as well.
Yeah, just an adult in the room. I think if you want to be an optimist about this, you can say that there's a tremendous benefit to having as many guys with play calling experience, NFL level, college level, as the Ravens soon will have, with between Joe Lombardi, Ledford, called plays, I think has Louisville's offensive coordinator. Obviously, Declan Doyle has experience as an offensive coordinator, even though he wasn't necessarily calling plays for the Bears. But you could also flip it and say, like, is there any risk of having too many cooks in the kitchen? I think it's always good to have like a good cross-pollination of ideas. But if there becomes some rough seas and you have a lot of guys trying to be the loudest guy in the room and saying, we should be doing this because it worked against Miami in 2019, or we should be doing that because it worked last year against the Chiefs in Arrowhead, then I think you run a little bit into some potentially tough situations. But I think generally having a lot of smart guys with good ideas in the room, you could just have the kind of democratization of ideas and just let the best idea win.
Yeah, and I think also, Ledford is kind of the sort of wild card, right? Because I don't think there's any previous, but Declan Doyle and Joe Lombardi worked together in Denver. Like
right.
that actually makes a lot of sense to me on a lot of levels, coming up through that Sean Payton system. I guess Doyle did, and Lombardi knows what it's like to work for Payton. So there's some sense of common culture there. Just want to ask, I'm sure we're wrapping up soon, but Lombardi, is that a coaching family tree?
I feel like it is. I feel like it probably is.
Okay. We'll look it up later.
We are wrapping up as well.
He is the grandson of Vince Lombardi.
There it is.
Oh, interesting.
There it is.
Oh,
yeah.
Little fact for you.
Jonas, as you know on this podcast, we had to retire the soundbite of John Harbaugh saying...
we didn't have to do anything, but we did the responsible thing.
We did the responsible thing. Any responsible podcast host would have retired the soundbite of John Harbaugh saying, shout out to the banner, with an air horn sound behind it. And in the last few weeks, I'll say our podcast has been lacking. It's needed that punch at the end of shows. And so Kyle and I decided to bring in a special guest in order to give us a new soundbite and a new shout out to the banner.
Shout out to the Baltimore banner.
That's Carmelo Anthony.
Heck yes.
That is Baltimore's own Carmelo Anthony and Syracuse's own.
Towson Catholic. Let's go.
Yeah. How did we get him to say that? Don't have to worry about that.
Don't have to say what kind of bags you dropped. Don't have to say what was in the briefcase that you handed over. All that matters is that you got it done.
And as we know, Carmelo Anthony, I'm sure, has a subscription to the Baltimore Banner, $1 for 6 months. Perhaps he's past his 6 months as well. But we know that Carmelo Anthony loves the Baltimore Banner.
Also know that he's not a fan of Syracuse basketball, as I discovered in the current version of Syracuse battle.
He's a fan of the program.
I saw someone do a screen grab of him venting his frustration at the current state of Orange basketball as they got obliterated last night by North Carolina.
He's not the only one.
He was watching when we were there. He was watching courtside,
streaming the game,
on his
son
phone.
plays for the team.
And didn't look great.
How much Maryland basketball have you two been watching?
More women's than men's.
Maryland has a basketball program.
Amazingly, they do have a men's basketball program.
I'd just like to end this.
At Kyle Goon is his handle. At Jonas_Shaffer is his. Subscribe to the banner where you can get plenty of stuff. That Vanderbilt story that Kyle wrote about is up. It's terrific.
A new story from Gianna Hahn about Jesse Minter today.
Awesome story about what it's like to be coached by Jesse Minter, to be on the same staff as Jesse Minter, how he's... Don't let his calm exterior fool you. He is a fiery competitor. He's a leader of men, good teacher, and good student as well. Very interesting story there. We have so much more coming for you, and we'll keep you updated with all of the Ravens' latest moves.